yeah, it's a new material for me, and I will very much look forward to your input for discussion, which we will have. Can you see my slides? Can you hear me? Well,
Yes.
no. Yeah. Good. So yeah, I'm gonna be starting this picture from Expo of 1967. Then in Soviet Pavilion, quite an astonishing architectural project was featured, and it's a city called Lvov, designed for Arctic region, for the environment with quite severe climate, with winter temperatures reaching -50, permafrost, and polar night of half a year, 6 months. And so architects proposed to design some kind of a futuristic utopian project with artificial climate, where all the buildings are interconnected with winter gardens and insulated streets. And it responded very well to this international ongoing discussion on the colonization of Arctics going on at that time in late 60s and 70s. And just to give you an example of what it was about, this is another German project about the Arctic city, and it shares this very similar idea that if the new materials, new engineered structures like these domes, colonization of these hospital environments of Arctic can go much smoother. So here, Soviet architects were trying to engage in this national discussion. However, this Soviet project was quite deceptive. Because this settlement of Aihalit was actually constructed, but it looked very different to this utopian megastructure. It looked rather as this 5-story high buildings. In Russia, they are commonly known as Khrushchevki. Yeah, this very particular housing typology for socialist countries. And so here, despite this is an Arctic environment, this housing is adapted for this weather conditions, and how it looks. And so the way Aihal looks is much more typical for this Soviet Russian approach to colonization of these northern territories. And together with this adaptation of typical mass housing came a very unique emphasis of Russian way to approach development in the far north, especially with mass housing. And the Soviet Union, Soviet Union designed a huge cities in a polar circle. 2 examples, Vorkuta and Norilsk, both of them are located beyond the Arctic Circle, and it's quite difficult climatic conditions with lots of darkness and extremely cold temperatures in this. But you can see here this densely packed residential neighborhoods and urban fabric which resembles cities in more temperate latitudes. And this mass housing in Arctics, it allowed a dramatic increase in population in Soviet Arctics. So you can see that in the beginning of the century, in 1990s, it was approximately 200,000 people living there. But by the end of the century, it was already 2.5 million, while the global population of all the countries in the Arctic was between 3 and 4. So a significant part of the population of Arctic lived in Soviet Russia. Yeah. So how was it? Yes, I have another slide just to give you an idea how typical neighborhoods in these latitudes look in other countries, like in Alaska, for example. It's a very different kind of development with much less density than Soviet cities. So how was it achieved? I would argue that prefabricated housing technology was crucial at achieving these policies of colonizing the north. And prefabrication actually has a long history of of being used as a colonial technology. So this is just one well-known project, Dhaka's portable barrack, which was designed to be used in British colonies, in Australia, and it proved very convenient for extending this territorial implies because it's a mobile architecture which can be produced in the mainland, then packed, and here you can see it's been packed on a kind of a carriage. Yeah, it can be easily transported to other locations. Another crucial factor in prefabrication, but it requires limited amount of skilled labor. So most of the complex elements are prefabricated, pre-produced, and then it can be assembled without skilled craftsmanship on a site. Prefabrication also enables rapid territorial expansions because of its mobility. Yeah. But if you look at the history of Soviet prefabrication, it's a very different history. Almost no one writes it in within this colonial framework. On the contrary, mass production of housing, which started with Khrushchev policies in mid-50s, are seen as the social project. And lots of historians discussed that as one of the greatest social reform and the biggest social projects in the 20th century. Yeah, when the Soviet state finally turned to the needs of the people and started providing the basic commodities. And probably rightly so. So Soviet housing indeed was a large social project. Here also I'm showing the report from the newspaper how the technology for the production of Soviet housing was transferred from France. It's a Raymond Camus technology which was used in the Soviet Union as well. But my argument here that prefabricated housing was used for very different purposes in the Soviet Union. And if you look in an Arctic environment, it resembles rather a tool for enabling settler colonialism and for achieving this rapid expansion into the Arctic. So in a similar way as this colonial cottage, which I showed before, this ranch technology was re-engineered to be mobile also, to be rapid in production. And as other types of colonial infrastructure and colonial housing, it was designed to enable specific mobilities of specific people, of settlers going to Arctic, and also to hold various kind of populations in place. And I hope to demonstrate these two arguments in my presentation. So if you look at the history of urbanization of Arctic historiography, probably it starts with rapid expansion in the 30s and under Stalinist government. Then this mission for the conquest of the far north was declared. And lots of efforts were invested in exploitation of the resources of the far north. Most urbanization was done by prison labor, and largest cities like those which I showed, Norilsk and Vorkuta, they initially were formed as big prison camps of Gulag. Here you can see one of the type projects of a camp for 1,500 people, which was developed and widely used in a far north. Yes, and so in historiography of this northern city, this is a dark period, the Stalinism, which then switches to a much more optimistic time with Khrushchev putting an end to these prisons and enabling volunteer labor to come instead to. However, the Stalinist period never created such huge densities, urban densities there. So if we talk about Norilsk, its population in the late 30s was not so big. Yes, it's 15,000 people, 13,000 people. And that's how the city looked like. But it was specifically with prefabrication that this rapid increase in size of these cities happened. And so it is often it's often discussed that these volunteer laborers who come to the cities. The Komsomol worker, Komsomol is a organization for youth in the Soviet Union, and they were organizing these construction sites, inviting people to come and work there. But lots of these people who were coming, they actually found a very different conditions from what they were expecting. So here are the memoirs of one of these Komsomol volunteers, Boris Titov, who came to Norilsk in 1956. And he remembers he actually was housed in one of the barracks, which was used in a prison camp. Just the barbed wire was removed. And their first task was to redesign these prison facilities in housing for these volunteers coming to the north. And what we will see that lots of these people actually will end up trapped in these territories, and they would come, they would receive apartment there, and of course, apartment was one of the major bases, yes, for people to make this decision to relocate to these territories. During Khrushchev period, a much more ambitious strategy for mastering the North was developed. Then lots of his resources, non-ferrous irons, and so on had to be developed. And one crucial point in this strategy was to create a permanent population in the north. So not to rely on rotational workers camps where workers can come and work, but this specific vision of these big densely populated cities was articulated in mid-50s. And this task of creating a permanent population which will exploit this resource in economic terms. And of course, promise of housing and prosperous cities in the north was a central promise in this project of mastering it. From the architectural side of this story, an institute which was involved in this research and development of housing for the north was called Lenzniep. It was located in nowadays St. Petersburg. And its task was to engineer specific structures and to adapt this prefabricated technology for the far north. It's a huge territory. And you can see here also this kind of a colonial ambitions, just to design models for such a huge part of the land. And and the main task of this institute was to take existing solutions and existing house building systems and to try to adapt them for this new climate. So, for example, they were developing this system of piled foundations in order to achieve construction integrity and stability of structures on permafrost. They had to be elevated on these piles to prevent the melting of the soil beneath the structures. And it was not an easy task, and no one did it before. It was quite an original research of how to adapt these tall buildings for this environment. These buildings were also insulated, heavily insulated. Special layouts were developed here. So in this building here, you can see that residential apartments only start on the third floor. Yes, first two floors, they're used for insulation here. And a whole set of building standards were also developed to be able to adapt this housing for this climate. The first city where this industrial housing was actually delivered was in Norilsk. A factory for prefabricating housing delivery was established there, which started producing these blocks of flat. And here you can see also that they look very much like with typical neighborhoods in Moscow or in other cities in the European part of the Soviet Union. And actually the major argument of planners was that they are delivering the same kind of standards no matter where people live, no matter if it's north or European part, you will have a similar apartment and very similar housing. Also, a theory about how to plan microregions and how to adapt microregions was developed in Norilsk, and they came up with this closed structure of buildings closely aligned to protect against wind and snow accumulation. And the construction of the house building factory, it allowed to achieve this speed of urbanization in Norilsk. So already by the end of the 60s, these densely populated huge microregions were constructed there. And of course, apartments was the major incentive for people to move in these locations. Also, people living in the north were entitled to so-called northern bonuses, severные надбавки, so additional salaries, and it made sufficient incentives for workers from more temperate latitudes to work, to move and to settle. Yeah. It wouldn't be right to say that this kind of urbanism, which was developed in mid-60s, it was not without problems. There were many issues with this housing, with insulation, and lots of problems. And actually, the architects in these Lens-Dnieper institutes, they also critiqued these solutions quite a lot, and they developed lots of the alternatives. They were often called as these experimental residential projects. Which and IHAL is one of these projects. So they were often featured at these international exhibitions, architectural exhibition, but they presented quite a crucial difference, that most of them are designed for smaller settlements, yes, and for rotational worker settlements that they can spend some time. But this housing is not for a permanent residents. And a major discussion sparked about a way to house people in the Arctics, rather they should stay there, should be attached to the territory or not. Yes, and the proponents of this former way they eventually won. So this rapid rate scale of housing delivery was one of the important goals of re-engineering housing in this colonial technology. Another one was achieving mobility. And the major problem of urbanization of Arctics was the lack of infrastructure, roads, railroads, and Norilsk, this city, despite it was one of the biggest cities in Arctics, it has no railroad connection to mainland Soviet Union. And so in Norilsk, people until now, they call the rest of the country as a mainland and refer to the city as an island, because it's only accessible in a short time through the rivers during the summer, or by plane all the other time. So another task for the architects was to adapt this house delivery systems for this lack of architecture into ensuring its mobility. And a large research was done on how to use movable house building factories. So the same technology which was used in Norilsk, it was adapted for the use on boats. And here's a scheme of 3 different boats, which one after another can come to a specific location and start delivering housing. Also, there was the discussions of the use of airships in the north and mid-60s. And for the environments which had connection with the railroad, a movable house building factories on rails were designed here. So it's a scheme of this house building factory. It all can be packed in railroad carriages, transported to a location, specifically needed location, and start delivering housing there. So this concept of the movable house building factories, it triggered new problems. That delivering housing was not enough, but it required to deliver all possible kind of facilities for the settlement, also schools, kindergartens, shops, and all kind of public buildings. So the system was re-engineered not only to be mobile, but also to be universal, to be able to construct a whole settlement out of one mobile factory. So this is a design of such settlement, built of large panels and adapted for the temperatures of -20 and 50 degrees, which all can be produced out of the rails, actually. And already here, I think that this is quite a big of a departure from this French technology, as we know it, which was used for housing in European in temperate latitudes or the Soviet Union. These mobile factories were actually constructed and tested. So here you can see the panels produced out of this factory. This is the the assemblers of the construction whole, and several settlements in Siberia were actually constructed with it. So these mobile technologies, the crucial in the far north to achieve urbanization, not only of big cities, but also of smaller settlements. And Khrushchev policies, one of quite radical aspects was about this Khrushchev urbanization, that apart from big cities, it also envisioned collectivization of agriculture, construction of smaller settlements, of collective farms, of state farms in the north. And indigenous communities of whale hunting and other indigenous people living in the far north, in Chukovsky district, they were also relocated in these collective farms. They could still continue doing, relying on whale hunting, but they lived in these also industrially produced buildings. One of the examples is this Ulen district in a far east, in Chukovsky district, which is also located in the Arctic region. And another example is this Lavrentia settlement, also a whale hunting communities with indigenous people who were forcibly moved into this kind of housing. And of course, it meant quite dramatic changes for their lives. Yeah.
Can I have a quick question? So you just mentioned the indigenous people were forcibly relocated. Are we also talking about the 30s? So it was happening like during the following decades as well?
Yes. So this was the policies of collectivization developed in the 30s, as you rightly said, with Stalinist collectivization of agriculture. But there is an important difference here that Stalin's collectivization mainly happened on a base of traditional villages. So they were called kolkhozes. But if you look at the urban fabric, it's mainly wooden houses. You wouldn't find any of these two-story buildings, made out of prefabricated panels. And Khrushchev, in several respects, Khrushchev collectivization, it is often called like a second collectivization of agriculture. In many respects, it was less violent towards the local communities, but it created a much larger impact on an urban fabric by completely changing the way these villages looked before. These huge cities created in the Arctic regions, they have very different history. Norilsk is until now a bigger center for production of nickel. A huge smelting company is located there, and there is this kind of history of quite aggressive wild capitalism going on there, but it's still a densely populated cities. But Vorkuta, on the contrary, was a biggest coal mining city. Coal mining is not that much required now, and it is rapidly turning into a ghost city. The population rapidly declining. It is also extremely inefficient and very difficult to keep these buildings warm in this kind of climate. And it's almost impossible if there are empty flats to keep them warm. Even if you hit the whole building or not. And lots of residents of Vorkuta, they actually refer themselves as kind of hostages of the North, because once they got an apartment there, they are trapped there and they are unable to go to the mainland, Большая Земля, as they call it, the mainland. And there's a government campaign for changing these apartments for inadequate housing in our regions, but as one research article argues, it will take 125 years yet to provide enough housing there. And in Norilsk, as I said, it's still a place for one of the biggest nickel and palladium production facilities. It's a city, it's a non-industrial city, all organized around this plant. But it also faces lots of challenges because of the rapid climate change. And some of the structures designed for permafrost located on these piles, they are no longer reliable. And in 2020, it caused a major natural disaster with Norilsk oil spill. Then a huge gas boulder collapsed, and lots of oil was spilled in local rivers. So there are lots of challenges with this infrastructure, which was created in the Arctic, which is until now used. And I think this is something, which we can probably discuss sessions. This is all. Thank you so much for your attention.